right, we are back and live. Let everybody see that I've got my little sidekick here, Sabrina, in my lap. So if you see me fidgeting around, it's because my dog is in my lap as usual. But I am happy to announce our next guest. We've got Jacqui Robertson from Berkshire Hathaway joining us. So let me bring Jacqui in. Hey, Jacqui, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, thank you. As we were talking, you had quite the busy past few days, huh?
I have. Yes.
Had a bunch of
Graduation?
family over, graduation,
Yes.
soon to be
Yeah.
empty nesters.
Yes, that's a whole new season of life.
Yeah, that could be a podcast in itself one day, right? Just to
Yes.
talk about
Actually,
that.
that could be, and I think you and I were talking about blended families too, and that's a whole different conversation as
Oh,
well.
absolutely, a big one. Well, let's just
Yes.
get started, and if you don't mind, let's just start off about just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background in the senior industry, and how that transitioned over to the real estate world.
Sure. Well, we have lived in Georgia for 13 years now. And previous to our move to Georgia, I worked with an assisted living building that was called Morningside of Paducah in
Hmm.
Paducah, Kentucky. And
Okay.
it was owned by Five Star Quality Care. I think they
Okay.
still own several different buildings. And I had a background in sales and marketing. I had worked for Pepsi, I had worked for a hardware and
Mm.
software distributor. But when I started at Morningside, it was because we had moved to Paducah for my
Okay.
husband's job. And we had just had our twin sons the year before. And I was just looking for a little bit different marketing experience, one that I thought was going to be um, not quite as demanding as maybe working for Pepsi had been.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure that when I really started at Morningside, I understood everything that it was going to involve
Yeah.
in my 5 years of being there with working with seniors. But it turned out to be something I absolutely loved and enjoyed, and I was really sad to leave Morningside, but we were moving to Georgia, and I ended up getting my real estate license, which is a whole different
Yeah.
story. But
So the move was why you left the community?
it was,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
it
What
was.
drew you to start working at a community? And what position did you start in, and you eventually became was it the executive director or marketing director or both?
Um, well, I started out in marketing, and because I'd had marketing experience, that's what drew me to being at
Okay.
Morningside. And then the last year, because I was there for 5 years, the last year I was there, I was the executive director.
Mm. And coming from corporate like Pepsi to that, was it a transition of how you approached the day? Was it less stressful or more stressful in its own way?
It was definitely less corporate because I actually worked for an independent bottler. So it was a little bit different experience in
Mm.
working with Pepsi, but it was it was a completely different experience, and it was one in working in senior living that you felt like you were really impacting and helping people instead of
Right.
just marketing sugar water.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, but you felt like you were really helping people
Yeah.
and and making an impact.
So when you moved, what led to the decision to for real estate? I mean, taking the test is not easy. I mean, it's not a pushover test. What led you to take that jump?
Well, so when we moved here, I didn't know what I was going to do. And
Mm.
the real estate agent that actually had helped us with buying our home, her name is Tanya Jones, and
Okay.
she is to this day still with Berkshire Hathaway. She's in our
Oh
Fayetteville
wow.
office.
Okay.
Yeah, at the time she was with Prudential because that's who we were before we became Berkshire Hathaway. And she asked my husband what I was going to do when I moved to Georgia, and he
Right.
said, I don't know what Jacqui's planning on doing. And
Right.
I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay in senior living at that point because I didn't know. We were
Hmm.
moving away from family. Like I was sharing with you, our family lives 7 hours away from us.
Yeah.
And we were moving away from family. And she just asked, and I thought, well, why not take the experience I've had in senior living and translate that to real estate?
Mm.
And so I ended up taking the test, and I've had my license for 12 years now.
Wow.
So I just, yeah,
And here
yeah,
you are, right?
here
Well,
I am.
didn't you have a family member that you'd mentioned that was living in the community that you were ED for?
I did. I
And it
did.
was
So it was my grandfather.
wow. Now,
And
was he placed there after you were there, or was he already there when you? Okay, so you,
no, so I got the job at Morningside first, and my grandfather had been spending just winters with my parents. And my parents had been retired, gosh, at that point, probably for, let's see, this would have been 2000. The twins were born in 2004. So this might have been around 2006,
mhm.
2007 range. And my parents had been retired for about 5 years at that point. And my parents like to travel. It was not their retirement dream to have my grandfather living in their basement. And so and so I was at Morningside and had been there, and they thought that it would be a great idea because we were an assisted living community with a memory care, and they thought
Okay.
it would be a good idea for my grandfather to be at Morningside. And I was the marketing director, so I was there every day and I could check in on him, and they came down a couple times a week and checked in on him. And it really worked. It was a good experience. He lived there for about 2 years. And
Okay.
then shortly after his 90th birthday, his health started to decline
Mm.
and he
Yeah.
passed away. But he was
Okay.
there for about 2 of the 5 years I was there.
Wow. And this is getting into kind of the I guess you'd say the meat and potatoes of what I enjoy about doing this show with people like yourself is we want to make a difference for people that stumble across these podcasts. And also
Mm-hmm.
your experience as an executive director, you got to see a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so what was some of the biggest challenges that seniors and their families encountered that you witnessed that you may could share to help others that may be going down this path and facing these decisions? So what could you share that could help some families out?
One of the biggest things that I would see, like we were talking earlier, is that people would just sometimes families would come in and they were visiting and they would want to take a tour, maybe have lunch, learn about the community. They knew that a change was coming for their
Hmm.
parent, they or their loved one. They knew that they needed to make this change, but they just were I don't want to say reluctant, but they hesitated to make that change, or really encourage their loved one to
Mm.
make that change and make the move to the community. And then we would see them 6 months to a year later, and all of a sudden now we're in crisis mode.
Mm.
And maybe mom or dad aren't even really qualified at that point to be in an assisted living, but that's
Okay.
where they wanted them to be. I think that was one of the biggest things, as well as watching people, as we were talking about, with that role reversal,
Yeah.
where you are basically parenting your parent. I think that was always difficult to watch families work through that.
So when you say they come back in crisis mode, is it because they didn't have enough of the ADLs check off, which is, activities of daily living? Was it things like that they didn't qualify for insurances or something, or?
Well, so in the state of Kentucky, where I worked in assisted living, we were considered a social model, not a medical model.
Oh,
So
okay.
we could help you
Huh.
with your activities of daily living. We could do a medication reminder, but we could not
Okay.
dispense
Okay.
medication.
Right.
Um, and so because we were considered a social model and not a medical model, you still had to be able to walk or to ambulate, um, or you had to be able to transfer with the assistance. I can't remember at this point if it was the assistance of one person, maybe, I think, if you
Mm.
were going to
Right.
transfer,
Okay.
if you were in a wheelchair or something like that. But it was just maybe mom or dad's health had declined past that, or maybe they had a fall, maybe they had a reason they ended up in the hospital, and they had a stroke, something that would take them to where they wouldn't necessarily be our level of care anymore.
Yeah. Did you have many seniors come from being discharged from uh, a rehab center? Did a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them come from that?
They did. Sometimes we would have people that would come from rehab or a transitional care unit at the hospital.
Hmm.
Um, and it was a situation where maybe they had a stroke, or again they fell, they
Right.
broke their hip. They know they can't go home. So
Yeah.
once they finish their rehab in the skilled facility, then they would come to assisted living and they would move in with us.
And that leads me to, we were talking before the show, just, about, your parents and your husband's
Mhm.
parents. They're in their early to late 70s, and
Mhm.
just talking about, you know, y- y'all don't live in the same state, and you're
We don't.
already trying to put some things into place because you've had enough experience that firsthand, you witnessed it firsthand.
Right.
So I know that adds an extra sense of not necessarily urgency, but importance of,
Mhm.
that it's important that the family goes ahead and makes these decisions. And I think that can be one of the biggest challenges to that. But what was some of your favorite moments working with seniors in assisted living? There had to be some good times.
Oh, there were some great. I mean, there is one particular gentleman. His name was John R. Anderson, and he had a very interesting story. He had decided to start his insurance business
Hmm.
in Paducah while his son was in college, and he said it was such a strange. He said, I don't know why I thought that this would be such a great idea, but he had built a great insurance business that actually his son was running at the time that he was at Morningside. He had
Right.
ended up at Morningside because he got a stroke, but it did
Mm.
not matter. Any pretty female that came walking into the assisted living, he would stop and talk to them. And he was just a character. But I loved listening to his stories. He had some great stories. We had another gentleman who, his name was Walter. He was a CB in World War II. If you don't know what a CB is, look it up. I think they were engineers, basically,
Okay.
and they were part of the Navy, I believe, if I've got that right. But he had just some great stories, and he had moved. And this is a situation that we would see sometimes. He and his wife had retired at one time to Florida,
Hmm.
and then when his wife passed away, his son lived in Paducah. And so he moved to be closer to his son. And his
Okay.
son, he wanted his dad to have some independence. And so he moved him into assisted living versus having his dad live with him at his place. And his son would come almost every day.
Oh, wow.
And Walter ended up passing away in the amount of time that I was at Morningside, but
Mm.
he was one of the table mates that ate with my grandfather.
Oh,
So I got
wow.
to know Walter. There
Yeah.
was another lady, Mrs. Reynolds, whose sons would come every day and eat lunch with her every single day.
Wow.
And it was funny because the staff would call them the Reynolds boys. And I'm like, they're in their 40s and probably or yeah, probably their 40s at the time. I'm not sure, maybe early 50s. But the
Yeah.
Reynolds boys came and ate lunch with their mom every single day.
Did you
So there
ever see,
were
did you ever see,
what?
like when you have the families come in and there's the resistance from the seniors, like it just resisting it, not wanting to move in, not wanting to leave home. And then they get there and you see their quality of life drastically improve. Was that a
Mhm.
common situation that you would experience? That the social aspect of it end up making a big difference for their well-being?
The social aspect definitely made a difference for
Yeah.
them. I'm trying to think of I can't think of a specific instance, but yes, you would see people that would just really blossom because they were starting to get the meals and the social interaction that they were missing at home.
Right.
So we would see that.
That's what, just having, little mentioned comments to mom and dad,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that would be good for them, just the social
Mm-hmm.
interaction, because I'm on a flag lot behind them and we're close, but they don't. I think it would help them a lot just to have the social interactions. But with that said, because you came from obviously being heavily involved in a community to the real estate side, have you
Hmm.
found out are there any parallels between working with seniors and their families in assisted living community versus guiding them through a real estate transactions for those that don't have to move into a community? Is there any parallels to that?
There is. The biggest thing that I think I continue to still see is how do adult children maneuver assisting their parents with making decisions and yet still giving them the independence to make
Mm,
that decision.
yeah.
Um, that to me is probably the biggest thing that you still see, and people not making decisions quickly.
Mm,
Really, it being a long process to make that decision, which is understandable given the circumstances, because it is a big change.
yeah.
I have a client recently that their son is he runs an assisted living. I think it's a continuing care community
Hmm.
in Florida,
Okay.
and that's where they were moving. And so so they sold their house that they actually had built when they moved to Noonan, and he had built it. And so it was a big deal. And I mean, for them to go through 34 years
Mm,
of memories and items in their home and decide what they were going to take to their much smaller apartment in
yeah.
Florida. And then watching, because I believe they had siblings four children, I'm sorry. And I met two of the four
Hmm.
through assisting them with moving. But just finding that, because for this particular family, they really wanted their parents to be making all of the decisions
Yeah.
through the real estate transaction. They wanted them to have that freedom because they felt like this was probably that last big
Mm,
decision and last big uh, act of independence, because they were
right.
moving to a place where they were going to be closer to their adult son, and he would be and his family are right there. So they
Yeah.
felt like this was important for them to make a lot of the decisions
Would have to
with
be
the
a huge
move.
adjustment. You're going from, a house to really a couple of rooms. It's
Hmm.
quite the downsize. And so it's
It
just
Yes.
adapting to that. And like you're saying, getting rid of what could be a lifetime of stuff. It's difficult.
Well, and
Thank you. Thank you, Kim. Kim Poyer made a comment. I wanted to acknowledge that. She said, good info. Thanks for sharing. Thanks, Kim. Good to see you.
yeah, it it's that is one thing I will say. It's trying to make sure that whether you're going to make that decision to move now or you're going to move in 2 or 3 years,
Mm,
it's starting that process of going through all of those things. Because for this particular client, I think that was one of the biggest things that we had to work through, was how, their family was helping them with that too, was what they were actually going to be taking with them to
yeah.
Florida. But then what are we doing with the things that are left behind? Are we
Yeah.
donating them? Are we sending them to the dump?
Yeah.
What are we doing with those remaining items?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a tough
That was
decision too.
not to get off too far on this, but that was one of the ingredients of starting CareQuest, was being able to help families navigate that whole process and being, trying to come in and
Hmm.
give them all the different options, for the home, whether it's listing with someone like yourself, but
Hmm.
also helping them prepare to estate sales, decluttering, junk
Yes.
removal, that whole process. And we had it ended up being kind of sad, to be honest with you. We had an opportunity that it was a family out of McDonough, and
Hmm.
really, really nice home. And the father had already had passed, and the mother had to move in with the daughter in Florida, and they'd already sold two of their other properties, and this was the last one in the home she lived in. And just looking at how much stuff had to be left, it was
Hmm.
just like, and some nice stuff. You're just like,
Mhm.
geez, that's a lot. And of course, the father had passed, and just he was in the woodworking hobby, so he had his little
Mhm.
workshop, and you're just like, it's just sentimental and weird to just watch all that. Just it's over. It's a different chapter,
Mhm.
and just what the family had to go through dealing with it, and all. So I know that you're dealing with that daily, and I think that one of the main things that keeps becoming obvious, and this gets back to part of the reason of having people like yourself on the show, is the common denominator that keeps coming up, whether it's the home or whatever it is families need to start having these conversations. They're
Yes.
not easy, they're not
Mm-mm.
fun, and it can be
No.
challenging when you have siblings and hard-headed parents. Maybe not hard-headed, but some are. My mom is hard-headed, and
Mhm.
these conversations need to start happening because families aren't prepared, and
Right.
they're gonna need to start. So, with that said, what is some advice from your experiences that if someone was going to come along and use your services in advance
Mhm.
to sell their home, what's some takeaways that you can share that are like golden nuggets that they would just people could hear you share that to help them prepare in advance? What would that be?
One of the big things, and we are kind of touching on it in what we've been talking about the last few minutes, is just go ahead and plan that decluttering and
Mm,
go ahead and just start. Even if you're just starting with one room,
yep.
go ahead and make that decision. And one of the other things that's just very surprising, I guess, kind of, is that, we have different collectibles that we place a lot of value on because we
Yeah.
love them. My
Yeah.
mom has Emmett Kelly clowns. Um, I'm thinking of plates, different collector plates, Hummels, I don't know, any of those things. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't have as much value beyond what you love
Think
about
they're
them.
worth. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes it's just starting, I would say just starting to declutter is one of the biggest things, but also going ahead and having those tough conversations and knowing what you're going to do in the future as far as what are your thoughts about the house? Do we want to sell the house? Just having somebody come in and talk to you about, I'm sure maybe you haven't had a guest yet, talk about power of attorneys and
Hmm.
living wills and all of those things too. But as far as the sale of the house, I think decluttering is probably one of the biggest things because it's a struggle too, as to whether or not, if someone's lived in the house a long time, it might be a struggle as to whether or not they need to make any of those updates. Maybe they're
Hmm.
better off selling the house in an as is condition. And I know
Right.
you kind of deal with that a little bit with CareQuest too.
Hmm.
Um, or just going in and talking to a real estate professional about what are some of the easy things that someone can do, whether that would be
Right.
paint or redoing the flooring.
Maybe some even
Um,
curb appeal,
yeah.
decisions, up front. But do you come across, and I know this is more common than people realize, that let's call them professional collectors that are verging off of hoarding? That's can be very challenging situations on that because it gets back to you mentioning decluttering. And that's
Hmm.
one thing that I am very happy that I've noticed. Didn't really realize it at the time years ago, but my mom and dad experienced it with their parents, and they started decluttering years back and just
Hmm.
slowly started doing stuff to where now it's weird. It's like I know now why they did it, and I'm appreciative
Right.
of it. But
Right.
that's a huge issue. Like, and that's important that you're bringing it up. Is go ahead and start going through and getting rid of some of the stuff because it becomes
Hmm.
a quagmire for helping move into a community, especially if there's emergency, if there's a slip, a fall, a stroke, or whatever, and
Right.
they literally can't move back home. That's
Hmm.
just an extra delay in the process.
Well, and the family that I was mentioning that recently moved to Florida, one of the things um, that I will say as a real estate professional that I probably should have brought the point more front and center with them was what we
Hmm.
were going to do with once the moving van had pulled out and gone to
Hmm.
Florida. Because
Yeah.
we did have a lot of things that I still had to assist them with getting out of the house before the buyers, because we actually had a contract on the house. So
Mhm.
we ended up listing it. And then when they moved, we were under contract, and we knew we had a close date. But for the buyers to take possession, we had to get everything out of there. And
Yeah.
so just having to navigate that, because I felt like in this particular instance, we didn't have as strong a plan on that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I took a lot of collectibles we were talking about.
Yeah.
I took boxes and boxes to Goodwill.
Wow.
Yeah, of some stuff. But no, I mean, just having that, going ahead and going through and decluttering, I think is one of the biggest things that someone
Yeah.
can start.
And what you had already mentioned as well is, are you coming across many situations in your business to where there is an issue that comes up because they didn't prepare with trust and wills, and probate issues
Yes,
majorly delay?
yes,
in-
I yes, I had a situation about 3 or 4 years ago. She was a widow, and we had the house on the market. And she had gone ahead and moved to an independent living community. And
Mhm.
so we got an offer. We were excited. We'd finally gotten the offer. I think that one was actually a cash offer. And
Wow.
we got the closing attorneys going through title, and he said, we have a problem here. The will, her husband's will, was never, nothing was probated when he passed away.
Wow.
And I said, did you not? And it's one of those things that in my head, I'm like, surely I asked the question, did we, did I ask the question? You know what I mean? Like her brother was helping her, and he had been passed away for a couple of years at that point.
Oh, wow.
And then it was, we had to find the will. That was the other thing.
Ugh.
So here I was in her apartment at her assisted living. And I went over there and I said, okay, where do you think it is? And she said, I think it's in this little safe. And so here we are trying to jimmy the lock to get to get the
Jacqui, the
will
safe
out.
cracker.
That's right. So actually, we got it open. I ran the will over to the attorney, and yes, it was the correct will. It was exactly what they needed to
Okay.
probate. But unfortunately, in that situation, we lost our buyer because they were afraid that there was going to be some issue somewhere that maybe they wouldn't have clear title.
Yeah.
And so when I asked her, I said, so why didn't you probate the will? And she said, well, they told me I didn't have to. And I'm like, who is
Wow.
they?
Yeah.
Who is they?
Yeah.
Who told you? But that
The
is probably one
mailman.
of the biggest. Exactly. That is one of the biggest things when you're listing a house and it's a widow or a widower, or even if the adult children are listing the house later, you have to make sure that will is probated, because it can hold up the closing.
Yeah. There's a Venus Sims. She's in real estate, and she's actually part of
Mm-hmm,
CareQuest. And
mm-hmm,
there is a sad story. It was a house she came across, and it was a woman. I think she had retired from the post office, and her daughter was still with the post office. It had been there forever. And they had someone come along that was interested in buying the house, and then it got tied up into probate. And it
yeah.
lasted 9, 10 months, and the woman passed
Mm-hmm.
away before it got cleared. And you're just like,
Oh no.
oh, me. Just
Yeah.
those kinds of stories that she didn't even get to. I don't know. It's just life can
Yeah.
be strange sometimes. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where it gets back into, can't stress enough the importance of this all being talked about, like we said earlier. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
if I had to get on a mountaintop and blow a trumpet, it would be, talk about it, deal
Mm-hmm.
with it. It's got to
Mm-hmm.
be discussed, because there's some things that when the plate is served to you, and you're realizing we're not prepared for this,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't realize that was going to be something. And sometimes sometimes they think everything's in order. Like my mom and dad they've done things right, so to
Hmm.
speak. But
Yeah.
then when me getting involved in this space and kind of learning more stuff, and then I had one of my sisters passed away, and I was like, I think we need to go have everything reviewed to make sure that
Hmm.
we will avoid probate if nature takes its course. And sure enough, there was something that needed to be buttoned up, and Dad was just sure that everything was fine.
Right.
So that's not always the case, um, but like you were saying earlier, when you and your husband and your parents and his parents, you guys are scattered in different
We
states.
are.
So back to when you were an executive director, how much of a challenge did that bring to having someone that wanted to move in and having to deal with all the different decisions and not being in the same state? Did that add extra pressures to the families by not being in the same area?
Um, yes. I can't think of an instance, exactly, but yes, there was always one child who ultimately ended up being um,
Mm.
the main caregiver,
Yeah,
and that person usually was the one person who was local. But
yeah.
yes, a lot of times we didn't. It wasn't so much that we had people from out of state that would usually be moving their loved one in. Usually,
Hmm.
it was moving the loved one closer to them because the loved one had been out of state.
Right.
Um, but usually, if there were several out of state relatives, there was usually one person who was in Kentucky, and that person was the one who was the main caregiver.
Mm. Well, back to the real estate.
Uh huh.
You've been doing this long enough that you've rode many of roller coasters with the market, buyer's market, seller's market, in between. What's your pulse on today's market? So if someone is trying to make the decision of moving into an assisted living community, or maybe they just want to move into a 55 and over and just go ahead and just get out of their house and downsize and move into a community that if they needed to, they could graduate to different levels of care.
Hmm.
Where's the market at today and what should people expect? Because they're not going to be able to get in the same bidding wars as what was happening last year, right?
No. It's interesting because I was looking at something today from a company called Keeping Current Matters, and they talk about what's always happening in the real estate market, and
Mm.
they were calling 2020 and 2021 unicorn years,
Yeah, yeah,
because they were so unique,
yeah,
because we did have
yeah,
so much so many bidding wars and so much
yeah.
competition. The interesting thing about the real estate market that we're seeing right now is we still have low inventory.
Okay. Oh, all
But
right.
we still have low inventory. For example, in Coweta County, across all price points, this morning we had 380 houses on the market.
Oh,
That's not
wow.
a lot of houses.
Yeah,
Um, Also, depending on the house, depending on how it's priced right now, depending on condition, some houses are still getting multiple offers. Other houses are just getting one or two offers, or just, or they just get that one. They get that one offer, and it might take 30 days to get it instead of
yeah.
30 hours,
Right.
like
There's not as
like
many.
it
Yeah,
was.
inventory is low, but there's not as many showings as per se. It
Right,
takes a little bit longer to sell the house.
right.
And all,
And
and I think
yeah,
it's true as well as the price point makes a huge difference as well because the rates have gone up
yes,
several times, and so
yeah,
someone that used could afford a $400,000 house can only afford a $300,000 house type, with the payments and stuff. So
right.
I think people
Well,
still need to go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was
No,
going to
we
say
had a delay.
yeah, our average sales price too, when I got my license in 2011, it was a very different market. It
Yeah.
was still recovering from the housing crisis. But our average sales price in Coweta County right now is somewhere in the fours, the lower
Okay.
fours, and that's
Right.
the average. Whereas, that is a dramatic difference. I feel like right now that first time home buyer is probably being affected more by where we are with rates and where
Right.
average sales price is. But to your point, when you're talking about someone who is trying to possibly sell the larger house because they want to move to the upcoming 55 plus continuing care community, as long as they have well maintained the house and they've done the maintenance and they've kept up with the big ticket items, the roof and the HVAC and the hot water heater and those things that are important with buyers out there. When they're doing those, when they're taking care of their home like that, I mean,
Yeah.
those people, there's a place to sell those homes for
Yeah.
sure. But yeah, our
Okay.
market continues to be interesting.
Well, it's gonna continue to be
Yeah,
interesting. It's no telling where things are gonna go. We just have to take it one day at a time. But
exactly.
Jacqui, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to come on here.
Absolutely.
And you have anything you want to add that's off the top of your head that maybe didn't ask or think of?
Um, I can't think of anything.
The winning
Um,
lottery ticket numbers, something?
no, I don't have, yeah, no winning lottery ticket numbers. I do agree with what you were saying about communication is the biggest thing with
Yeah.
all, whether you're selling your house and you're trying to downsize or right size, or if you are thinking about moving into an independent or assisted living community, it's just communication with your family. And I think that takes the stress out of it the more that you're communicating with your family members.
Excellent. Well, I did fail to do one thing, and I apologize. Hey, if for someone that's in the area and wants to get a hold of you to help with the house, what's a good contact for them?
Well, my email address is Jacqui, and it's spelled JACQUI
Hmm.
Robertson Robertson at BHHSGA.com. Or
Hmm.
you can always call me at 678-788-5111.
And Kim just actually made a very good comment. And I'm going to ask you this. What would be your
Okay.
perfect client today? Thank you, Kim.
My perfect client.
Yeah, that's a
Um,
good one.
wow,
Someone with
that
lots
is
of
a
money,
good.
right? Yeah, yeah. But what would be your perfect client? That's really good.
Okay, if it's someone who is selling their house right now,
Uh-huh.
it is someone who has, like I was saying, done that has well maintained their home,
Mhm.
that they've taken care of the little maintenance items.
Mhm.
Somebody who is willing to understand and where we are in the market right now,
Okay. Ah,
and
yes.
what
Yeah, be
somebody,
realistic and
yeah,
understanding
be
that, yeah, you're
realistic.
yeah.
Yeah, be realistic of where we are. That maybe we can't get the price that your neighbor got
Yeah.
6 months ago, a year ago. The
Yeah.
fact that you're not going to have 13 offers potentially,
Yeah.
but someone who's realistic on the buying side, which we're not talking about necessarily today, buying real estate, but just buyers need to understand that they need to be pre-qualified before we start looking at homes.
Yeah.
That's very important in taking those steps. And when you're on the buy side, to make sure that you are doing all of those things like paying your bills on time, that helps your credit,
Yeah.
which obviously is going to help your credit rating and can help you as far as what kind of loan you can qualify
Yeah.
for.
Excellent. Well, Kim, thank you for that. Well, Jacqui, a pleasure. Appreciate it. And can't thank you enough again. And I will be seeing you at one of the niche meetings coming up, I'm sure. But
Yes.
greatly appreciate you. And I hope that you have a great evening. And until then, we want to sign off and thanks everybody for watching.